Patrick McKenzie and Famous Groupies. What are their Beatle connections? Many of you will be familiar with the band Famous Groupies. They have made 4, soon to be 5, albums, and many of their songs have a distinctly McCartney sound. The band leader for Famous Groupies is McKenzie, and his grandfather was the ghostwriter Patrick McKenzie. Claims that many of the songs that Famous Groupies have released were written by his grandfather, who was a ghostwriter in the 60s and 70s. The Beatles song Eleanor Rigby mentions a Father Mackenzie, and Memoirs also comments on this. If we look at the footnote on page 190, we see this. To prevent people from suspecting that Mackenzie refers to the ghostwriter Patrick Mackenzie, William created a story to show how Paul came up with that name. As his story goes, Paul looked up McCartney in a phone book and scanned down. When he found Mackenzie, which sounds similar, he replaced McCartney. I don't know who is in the picture on the right here, but very possibly this could be Patrick Mackenzie. Now we're going to look at the Famous Groupies' first 2 albums, and we're going to look at the artwork, the credits, and some of the lyrics from a couple of songs. We're going to start with this album, the Ferry White album. So if we turn to the credits on this album, we see that the bass guitar and mentor was Paul McKenzie. At first I wondered whether these were recordings taken from the demos made by Patrick back in the day. And then I thought maybe it's Billy under yet another pseudonym, which is the sort of thing he would do. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed also on those credits that one of the guest musicians was Lawrence Juba, and he of course played guitar with Billy when he was still with Wings. So that's also another interesting connection. So now we're going to take a look at the lyrics of a couple of songs from this album. We're going to look at Ghostwriter and Maggie's Farm. We're going to start with Ghostwriter. So these are the lyrics. Ghostwriter. Hey ghostwriter, write me another song. Go on now, get along. You ain't done me wrong just yet. Hey ghostwriter, like we agreed upon. So go on now and write a hit song so we can get rich. You can pay the bills and while we wait, I'll go fish. He sits alone and he works all day. The fans who adore him don't know his name. He writes the songs that make the whole world sing. If you need a good anthem, give him a ring. Hey ghostwriter, strong as the lexicon. Open from noon until dawn, go write a hit song for me. He works alone and he writes all day. The words from his pen are not the words he might say. He writes the songs that make the young girls cry. If you need a rainmaker, give him a try. Hey ghostwriter, last one was kinda long. Go on and write me that song so I can be rich. You can pay the bills and while we wait I'll go fish. The lyrics should be perfect for me. Our drummer would be grateful for a solo or 3. Hey ghostwriter, go write a hit song for me. Hey ghostwriter, go write the hit song for me. You pick the key. Hey ghostwriter, go write a hit song for me, 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 me. Hey ghostwriter, go write that hit song for me. The band would be grateful if you write a hit song for me, me, me. Hey ghostwriter. And if we look again at the credits, once again we have Paul McKenzie on bass. On the Famous Groupies website, they keep a journal. And in the post from October 2020, they wrote this about the ghostwriter song. I find the subject of ghostwriting especially fascinating lately. As you may or may not already know, my grandfather, the late Patrick McKenzie, was a ghostwriter for many years. And as time goes by, my family and I learn more and more about his somewhat mysterious life as a ghostwriter. I mean, we all knew he was a multi-instrumentalist and a songwriter, and we knew that he had written for a variety of artists throughout the years. But we never really pestered him about his past. He was a very lively fellow, brimming over with exuberance and natural energy, all of which was very charming and very entertaining. It was all we needed. As I have gone through many, many more songs and notes and books that he had left behind, I have been able to place more pieces of the puzzle together. And as we are in the final mixing mode of the new album, most of which was written by Patrick, there is one song on the album that piqued my interest even more. Patrick had actually penned a song entitled Ghostwriter. Well, we have just mixed this song, so we had to hear the song played over and over again, which got us all chatting about the content of the lyrics. I will post a bit about the lyrics below. And then he includes the lyrics, which I have just read to you, so I have skipped over those. And then he continues, "This suggests that his work is being heard by a large audience, presumably all over the world. Well, I started to pay more attention to notes written on lyric sheets and in his notebooks, and I noted that he had talked a lot about a Scottish band from the mid-60s called the Beatles. They were also known as the Scottish Beatles. I always thought they were a cover band, but I looked into them a bit more and made a few connections fairly quickly." Okay, Patrick was originally a session player, more so at first than a songwriter. He did play covers in a few bands prior to 1965, and it seems that he had worked with a few fellas from the Beatles, which then introduced him to Decca Records, which then led him to writing songs for local artists. Back then they didn't credit you properly, so it's difficult for me to see if he was on payroll or if they simply gave him a few pounds per song, and that was that. The Beatles had a hit in 1965 with a tune called Everybody's Talking About My Baby. I believe that Patrick had a hand in writing this one, as well as another one of their hits called Little Boy, which sounded very much like Patrick's style during that era based on tapes I have found of his. I believe that Patrick wrote more for this band and many more songs for other Decca record artists. The timeline works out as he was in London in 1965, which is where Decca London was. He would have probably met Denny Lane around this time as well. I'll just stop right there, but I will say that the ghostwriter that Patrick was will surely be exposed on the Furry White album. We will pay tribute to his work and the 17 songs we have selected to record. And that's the end of the post. I find it particularly interesting that they mentioned Denny Lane at the end there, because of course Denny Lane played with Billy in the Diplomats when they were based in the Birmingham area, and also again with Wings. So there's a double connection there. Judging by the lyrics of Ghostwriter, I would say that Patrick was expressing a fair degree of frustration with his position, that he'd written songs that were extremely famous, very popular and very successful, but obviously as a ghostwriter, nobody knew that they were his songs. And I imagine if he really did write for the Beatles, that would be frustrating in a way that I don't think I could even comprehend. So now we're going to turn to the lyrics of another song from Furry White album, and that's Maggie's Farm. Someday they're gonna tear down Maggie's farm. Someday They're going to burn down that old barn someday. They're going to dig up all that land someday. They're going to find that missing man. Somebody somewhere let her down, and now Maggie can't be found. She ran Junior's farm into the ground. Maggie, Maggie, where have you gone? Somebody somewhere let her down. Now Maggie's gone and she can't be found. Everybody's saying we should burn the whole thing down. Maggie, Maggie, where have you gone? Maggie, Maggie, what have you done? Maggie, Maggie, run. When we look at the lyrics of this song, we can't help but think that this is about Billy's Scottish farm. The instrumentation even includes Highland bagpipes to really ram home the Scottish theme. Obviously, it's about Paul being buried on the farm, and it even references Billy's song that he wrote with Wings, Junior's Farm. Lastly, of course, we still have full McKenzie on bass. Next, we're going to take a look at another album by Famous Groupies called Rehearsing the Multiverse, with its very interesting front cover, channeling Red Rose Speedway, but with apples. And again, if we look at the credits for this album, we notice that the special guest was Mitch Weissman. He, of course, played Paul McCartney in the stage show Beatlemania in the 1970s. And in fact, if we look at the journal post for the band from their website, we can see a couple of photographs that they took of Mitch when he was recording with the band. He even played wearing a Beatle wig. Also, if we look at the cover art for the Rehearsing the Multiverse album, we see this dedication from the band to their grandfather, Patrick McKenzie. I'm not going to read all of this out, but I am going to highlight one section from the middle. Patrick McKenzie would grace many records during the heyday of the 60s and 70s, and he would eventually ghostwrite for many small and big name artists too. I could name drop one big artist that he wrote for, but you wouldn't believe me anyway. No one would. Still, here we are. I take that as a sign of Capaldi saying he wrote for the Beatles without actually saying he wrote for the Beatles. So now we're going to take a look at the lyrics of the first song from this album, called Don't Bury Me. Don't bury me. Driving out of North Kensington, heading for the motorway 1, her name is Rita, said she needed a ride. We ran the light for going too fast. The car exploded with a mighty crash. The phone is ringing, but nobody's home. At 26, he was gone too soon, but his funeral would have to wait. Don't bury me before I'm gone. Don't bury me before I'm gone. Billy was the only one, an orphan and a shepherd's son. He wasn't left, and he sure wasn't right. By fall, he was the king of the band, the Pepper Pot starring Billy Camp. He's still good-looking, but he's so hard to see. The papers say that he lost his head, but his future looks oh so bright, bright, bright. Don't bury me before I'm gone. Don't bury me before I'm gone. Please, Mr. Maccabee, we need you. I'm not supposed to be you, and carry on this way, way, way. Your secret's safe, buried in the grave. There's only one Billy Shears, long gone, and that's you. Don't bury me before I'm gone. Don't bury me before I'm gone. Don't bury me before I'm gone. Oh, look out. A lot of people think that this song is about Paul McCartney, about his death, and the cover story for his death, about Billy coming in and replacing Paul McCartney, and obviously to an extent that's true, but I also think that it's about Patrick. Because if you put yourself in his position, you've been ghostwriting for the Beatles, and then Billy turns up, and suddenly the instruction becomes Billy, with the backing of the other Beatles, is the one conducting the writing and performing of the Beatles' material. What happens then to the people who were writing the Beatles' material and performing it, for that matter? Do they suddenly find their careers curtailed, maybe even buried? Maybe that's what he's talking about. When he says, at 26 he was gone too soon, he isn't talking about Paul, because Paul died when he was 24. I think he's talking about Patrick. I think Patrick was the one who was 26, in which case he must have been born something like 1940. I'd be interested to know what you think, but that's what I think about this song. I think it's about the potential burying of Patrick's career as a ghostwriter, and possibly even as a session player, because he was also a session player. The other thing I noticed from this was the mentioning of Billy was the only one, an orphan and a shepherd's son. So it's interesting that he was already an orphan at that point. And shepherd, interesting spelling of shepherd. Perhaps that's the actual way that he spelt it. Also, of course, it mentions the Pepper Pots, which was his band. And I think when we look at the Pepper Pot albums, what look like cover versions of those Beatles songs are probably actually demos that were given to the Beatles to help them learn those songs. And in fact, Billy does mention this a couple of times in memoirs. So now we're going to take a look at another journal post of the Famous Groupies from January 2021, when they were working on the album called Chameleon Sessions. Well, we have already broke ground on the next Famous Groupies album, The Chameleon Sessions. This album will be a wee bit different from the previous albums. We have set aside at least 25 songs that have very unique signatures, in that they remind us of other various artists from the early to mid-1970s. McCartney's style has been a staple thus far in our sound, and that, of course, is all thanks to Patrick McKenzie and his writing. But he also wrote many songs that remind us of other artists of his day. So it seems that as a songwriter, Patrick was something of a chameleon or Zelig. And we thought it would be a fun change of pace if we were to select an album's worth of this material and have a go at it. Here's a who's who list of what you can expect to hear style-wise on the Chameleon Sessions album. Gilbert O'Sullivan, Randy Newman, ELO, The Move, Queen, The Hollies, Paul McCartney, Nilsson, and Pilot. Yeah, I think there's a song on that album called The Continental, which reminds me so much of Queen, specifically the song Killer Queen. And if Patrick really could write in that many styles, then he was clearly a very talented man. Now we're going to look at another journal post from October 2021. Since dropping the last and presumably final Famous Groupies album, I have had time to dig even deeper into Patrick's notes, songbooks, tapes, and sheet music. There is a wealth of good material here, but I could spend a lifetime trying to get it all out there properly, and I'd probably fail miserably. I doubt there is enough time, so I had a thought. I've been cobbling together as much of the better recordings that I could. That is to say, the actual recordings for the many demos and ideas that Patrick himself had recorded between the years 1968 and 1980. I very much like the idea of releasing those recordings as is, for his fan base to digest and ponder. Anyway, it's still in negotiation with my family, and a few of us don't much care for the idea of releasing Patrick's material in this way, and I can respect and appreciate their point of view. So this may or may not even happen, but I am hoping that it does. I will keep you all posted should I have any good news in the future. I can't speak for other people. I will only speak for myself. Please release it. I desperately want to hear it. I think beyond the actual Paul is dead stuff, the thing that really fascinates me and the whole of the Beatles conspiracy is who actually wrote the music, who actually wrote it, and who actually performed it. Those are the things I want to know more than anything. So I would be delighted to see this material as is. But I'm guessing, considering this was from October 2021, that it probably won't happen, which is kind of sad. Then again, they also said that Chameleon Sessions would be their last album, but it wasn't. So there's hope. Now let's look at a journal post from September 2023. And this was written on the back of their single, The Scotch of St. James. Imagine a discreet, decadent little meeting place, tucked away in the heart of Mayfair, a place with thick wooden doors, beyond which can be found stairs that lead down beneath street level and into the very heart of hedonistic 1960s London. The Scotch of St. James was such a place, and Patrick McKenzie would frequent it often. During his time as a ghostwriter for London Decca, right about 1965, the Scotch opened its doors to the swinging mods of the day. By all accounts, it was a happening place. Celebrities would come and go. Folks like the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, and the Hollies would often drop by, and occasionally you would see a young Paul McCartney seated with a friend or two in the back. I can't be sure if Patrick ever shared a table with Mecca, but it was around that time that they would be introduced, so I can easily imagine they did. I wonder what they talked about. What was their preferred drink? It was at the Scotch that an unkempt musician played for the first time ever under the stage name Jimi Hendrix. Clapton was discovered there by the head of Atlantic Records, and it was the very spot where Paul McCartney first met Stevie Wonder. Yes, the Scotch was a very special place indeed. In truth, I had never heard of the place until I came across one of Patrick's songs, aptly titled The Scotch of St. James. After reading his lyrics, I had to investigate, and once I learned all that I could, I understood the significance and the history, especially as it was part of Patrick's history. It's a beautiful piece about young love, navigating swinging London, and of course, music and fashion. Pop culture rings like a bell with this one, and so it's my great pleasure to release this song come October. I think that once you hear it, you too will gain much insight into the goings-on of a very young Patrick McKenzie as he takes on the world. And it did in fact include this photograph with the post. So that last journal post reminded me of this excerpt from a Paul McCartney interview with Maureen Cleave from the London Evening Standard, and this was first published in that paper on the 25th of March 1966. And it says, "At the moment, he is on a programme of self-improvement that he is embarrassed to discuss, but his mind, by all accounts, is in a ferment. I don't want to sound like Jonathan Miller going on," he said, "but I'm trying to cram everything in, all the things I've missed. People are saying things and painting things and writing things and composing things that are great, and I must know what people are doing." He has a music lesson a week from a composer, who is by no means thick, he said admiringly. "At school, I never got further than the six-finger exercise. And the other day I felt like an old person sitting there saying, 'Oh, I wish I'd learnt to read music,' so I started to learn. One of the first bits of music he wrote down was something for his girlfriend Jane to play on her classical guitar. And I really wonder whether the composer that he was working with, who was teaching him, was Patrick McKenzie. Just a thought. I also really wonder why it's so important that the character of Paul McCartney, whether it was the real Paul or Billy or whomever, why it was so important for the character of Paul McCartney to not be able to read and write music. It's almost as if the output is much more special, almost miraculous, because the character behind it supposedly can't read and write music. But of course, that lack of skill is exactly, for me, the thing that made me the most suspicious. This interview came out as a set of interviews that Maureen Cleave did with the Beatles. And of course, that set of interviews included the comments that John Lennon made about Jesus, and that completely eclipsed everything else that was in those interviews. So this, I think, has very much been packed away in a corner and kept hush-hush. And so this is the final journal post that I will discuss. This is a journal post from January 2024. As we near completion and release of our new and final album, we wondered if our record was really that much longer than the other long albums. We couldn't help ourselves, we had to find out, and so this is what we found. There is actually a band that released an album with 1,000 micro tracks. Insane, right? Now, because of the limitations of vinyl, it can only hold so much information, as they are but one size, and that goes for CDs as well. But of course, digital albums can be infinite in length. So we compared our album to the Beatles' White Album, consisting of 30 tracks, clocking in at over 93 minutes altogether. The White Album is the Beatles' longest by a significant margin. In fact, if you look at the length of the stereo version of the White Album, it's 93 minutes and 33 seconds. So that's a little hello to the Thelemites and the Freemasons. Now, the next album, supposedly the last album, but they've said that a few times, the last album by the Famous Groupies will be called Black Apple. So I wonder what revelations will come out in that one. They haven't said how long it's going to be, but apparently it's going to be very long. If you haven't checked out the Famous Groupies, I will link their website in the description box along with their YouTube channel. Please do check them out and support them. They've put out some really good music. And that is the end of my video. Thank you very much for watching. And I'm really sorry it's taken such a long time to come back to this channel. I know I've had a gap for over a month, and that's because I've had a streak of absolutely appalling bad luck. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, it did, over and over again. And it just took all of my time, energy and money to put things right. And I still haven't put things right, to be honest, but it's, I hope, getting better. So I will hope to see you in the next one very soon. Thanks again for watching, and goodbye.